Hello, I'm Sean Patrick Lovett, and I'm here in the studios of Rome Reports together with Jill Alexi. Jill is a lecturer in theology. She's also the founder of an organization called Seeing the Sacred, and she's here to help us see some of the most sacred sites in Rome. Where are we going today, Jill?
Well, Sean Patrick, today I thought we would take a little conversational journey over to the Basilica of St. Mary Major, the first among all Marian churches in the world.
There are a lot of firsts in Rome. Say that again. The first to all the churches dedicated to Mary in the whole wide world.
In the whole world, that's right.
Which means it goes back to...
So it is in the running to be
Yes.
one of the oldest churches dedicated to Mary. So we never say that we know for certain this is the first one ever and this is the first date that it happened on 381 AD. But what we do know is that in the first generation of Marian churches, this very early church dedicated to Mary played a specific role for Marian devotion within the Catholic Church, within teaching our faith about who Christ is, and has a special relationship with every church dedicated to Mary all around the entire world.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's the church that Pope Francis visits before he goes on an overseas trip and returns to.
Right.
Usually he brings a bunch of flowers and places it in one of the chapels in the church.
The Borghese Chapel. So St. Mary Major, I think we can safely say, is Pope Francis's fave. He always goes to that church right before he goes on an apostolic visit in order to consecrate his trip to the Holy Mother in heaven, but also to ask for protection for the people of Rome in his absence. This icon, the icon Salus Populi Romani, is housed in the Basilica, and it's very ahead of its time. It's very woke, it's very cool, it's very 2025, because Salus Populi Romani means health, but a better term would be holistic wellness. So
that's how you translate the Latin?
That's how, I'm going to give you a novel translation of the Church Latin, but really, truly, salus in this case means mental, physical, emotional, familial, psychological, spiritual, health, well-being, and flourishing.
How beautiful.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's coming out of a cool retreat in, Arizona, but it's actually very, very ancient and dedicated to Mary.
Popoli Romani, so for
the Roman people.
For the Roman people.
The people.
So he's praying to keep the Roman people safe while he's away? Is that the idea?
He's praying for their continued flourishing in all these aspects of holistic wealth and flourishing, because as the Holy Father, he's constantly praying for their intentions as their pastor in Rome.
And what do we know about that icon?
So that icon, according to tradition, small t is very important because it means we don't say this is scientific reported fact. But according to tradition, small t, it was painted by the evangelist Luke, St. Luke, who wrote the gospel, on a piece of wood from the Last Supper. Now, yes, this is not, please don't fact check this, but it is an ancient...
Even the small t, it's a wonderful tradition.
It's a wonderful tradition.
It's something beautiful. It conjures up so many powerful images, and makes so many connections.
Well, it's a way of talking about what the Basilica is really, really about. And actually, I lecture to a lot of students and a lot of pastors who are from outside the Catholic and the Christian tradition. And they end up being most surprised and actually loving most St. Mary Major because it's all a way of talking about Jesus. That's the only reason that it exists. So even in this little folksy story of Luke painting on a piece of wood from the Last Supper is a way of talking about Jesus because the Gospels are about Jesus, because the Last Supper is the institution of the Eucharist and the priesthood and celebration of our faith. So in every small little detail of this basilica, we're talking about Mary, but it's only a way to get to Jesus and a deeper understanding, really no familiarity with who he is.
What about other items? Are there other pictures, paintings, statues, images that one should be paying attention to in the Basilica?
So not only is the Salus Populi Romani a miraculous icon, a special surprise inside, the other special surprise is that inside St. Mary Major you'll find the Sistine Chapel.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I know.
That's in the Vatican. It's Michelangelo, right?
There are
don't confuse me here.
No, I'm not pulling your leg. There are multiple Sistine Chapels, not just one. So the one over at the Vatican gets all of the love and attention and the fame. But if there has ever been a Pope Sixtus, and there have been 5, and if they ever made a chapel, and many Sixtuses made chapels, it's a Sistine chapel. If I ever make a chapel, my name is Jill, it will be the Jilline chapel.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, you and me both. But this is actually Sixtus V.
All right.
So he makes this chapel in the middle of the 1500s. His predecessor, Pope St. Pius V, is buried inside. And Pope St. Pius V is the one who promulgated officially for the first time, set into place, the Holy Rosary. So it's a chapel that also marks the promulgation of the Holy Rosary.
And so further Marian connections.
That's right. And there are even chapels, for example, in the Sistine Chapel, where St. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, celebrated his first Mass. Also contains relics that Jerome brought back with him from Bethlehem, from the Holy Land, to Rome.
And Jerome is the one who translated the Bible, right?
From Greek
Yes.
into Latin,
Okay.
yes.
Very good.
Lived
No,
in, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just thinking. No, I'm trying to. There's so many connections here,
Yeah.
right? I'm Ignatius, the Jesuit. I'm thinking Francis again. I'm trying to understand why the church would be important to him, and so forth. Looking at the inside of the church, looking down the nave, I think as you walk in, one of the elements that strikes you most forcefully, it's a canopy over the main altar that kind of is reminiscent of the one you see in St. Peter's.
That's right.
What is the deal with putting a big canopy over the main altar?
So fancy words only. The word for that is called baldacchino. And a baldacchino is actually reminiscent of the dwelling tent that the Israelites brought with them from Egypt as they wandered through the desert on their way to the Holy Land. And it went over the Ark of the Covenant where God dwelled amongst his people. So in St. Mary Major, and yes, in St. Peter's, there is a baldacchino over the altar to show that that is where God dwells amongst his people, in the altar in Christ. And it's very fitting that it would be in St. Mary Major, because Mary, of course, is the link between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So much so that in this basilica, whereas other basilicas have been rebuilt, this one has not. And when you walk in down the main nave, that's the long hallway, there's an area where there are windows. It's called a clerestory. And underneath the clerestory, you'll see these beautiful mosaics. They are all mosaics from the Old Testament that lead up to the baldacchino. And these mosaics, they're folk art, so they come from simple, poor people in Rome when the entire city and civilization was collapsing. It was like the Mad Max movie with Tina Turner and Mel Gibson from the 1980s. Everything's going completely down to the ground. And these Romans are making beautiful folk art mosaics of the Old Testament to lead up to Mary. And they hallmark that with the baldacchino.
So starting from the door, if I were reading, because I'm also thinking that back then a lot of people couldn't read or write.
That's right, that's right.
So the art had very strong educational purposes, right? So if I'm reading the art from the door, what will I see? Where do they begin?
So actually, it's very interesting you asked that about the mosaics, because there is no catalog and there's no history that is actually a written text that we have access to today that explains how they develop. So there is no program, what we say, of the actual scriptures going in order. All that we can do is read them with our own eyes.
Right.
There's a word for this called visio divina.
Yes.
And this visio divina is a way of reading the various books, but they lead you as your prayerful heart leads you. So you will find something from every single one of the books that's official. We call that the canon of the Old Testament. And they go back and forth across both sides of the aisles.
So you read what? Left to right, right to
Left
left?
to right, up and down,
up and
around
down.
in circles. It's not programmatic in the sense.
So it doesn't start with the creation story and
No.
Adam and Eve no.
Those actually come much later. It will actually be inspired by St. Mary Major, but it won't be until we get to the Scholastic and the Renaissance. That's almost a 1,000 years later that they're putting them in order and making everything very systemized. In this sense, it's really the faith of uneducated, simple people who were poor, who were living in a city that was completely falling apart, that took all of their last resources, all of their faithfulness, and all of the knowledge that they did had, and they just put up these mosaics as they could when time, money, and conditions allowed.
I'm not sure about you, but a lot of people, when I take them through these basilicas, they will ask, who did this?
Yeah.
where's the signature? And I think that's a very 21st century thing.
Right.
We want attribution. We want recognition.
That's right.
It's the selfie. I was there. I did this. What kind of mentality led people to simply give their time and energy and talent and skill to creating something beautiful, knowing that we'll never know who they were?
So there are plaques from the ancient world. Some fancy pants people did put some plaques over places to say.
That's refreshing to know.
So that does vibe with what we're used to. But the vast majority of this work, whether it be the mosaics that we are talking about in the Clear Story, or in the Triumphal Arch, or in the apse, or even the paintings in the Sistine Chapel in St. Mary Major, they're done by committee now. We also in our modern world don't have the best idea of getting things done by committee. And these things did take a long time. So that helps you get around the idea that one person with one voice did one thing, because they knew these things were going to take decades, if not centuries, to do. It went beyond them. They knew that from the start. So it was never going to be about one person. It was going to be about a community of scholars, artisans, directors, ministers, all coming together to put something together over time.
What a wonderful example. Moving through the Basilica now, we're looking at the canopy, it's over the main altar. Is there anything underneath the altar that we should know about?
So in every single papal basilica, there is an area called a confessio, and that's the area that you go down a little staircase and you reach a level that's underneath the altar. And there must be some important testimony, witness, martyrion from 1 Timothy to give a good report of the faith. So the thing that gives a good report of the faith in this basilica are the relics that have been moved from the Sistine Chapel to the main altar that come from what is now the Church of the Holy Nativity in Bethlehem.
Another connection.
Yes, that's right. So they call this basilica the New Bethlehem because when people could not travel to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, it was unsafe. That's not unlike today, where lots of people have had their trips and pilgrimages canceled. And back then, when it couldn't happen over centuries, they would send back relics and things from these holy sites so that people could have a visceral, tactile, dare I say, immersive experience of the Holy Land where they're at. It literally met them where they are at. So if you or know of anyone or have seen or read about the manger and the Church of the Holy Nativity, the actual relics that the earliest Christians were venerating there are now in Rome underneath the altar in St. Mary Major.
And what would some of them be?
So, according to tradition, again, small t, we have relics of wood from the manger, and it was according to a mystical vision. So we never say with scientific fact. I'm not going to present this in my history report to my AP history teacher. But with mystical vision of faith, Jerome said he was inspired to know that the wood that people had been venerating as the site of Jesus' birth was the wood from the manger. He also brought back dirt. That's an important part of the scriptures, that Jesus was born in a simple, humble manger with a dirt floor. So even these early Christians, and actually he's a doctor of the church, said, let's just bring back the simple, humble dirt, because that walking on the earth, that's really the incarnation, and that's what we should pray about here.
And we can see all this in the Basilica?
So you can see it behind a very, very fancy container called a reliquary. So if you go down into the confessio, you'll see an area that's highlighted in what looks like a trophy. It is to be considered a trophy because it's the trophy of our faith. We win heaven in Jesus. So it's the trophy you get for winning heaven through the incarnation. And inside that trophy is where these relics are.
Of the manger. And there's something wonderful in that word too, isn't there? Because it comes, manger, to eat.
Yes.
A place where things are eaten, and this is where he who allows himself to be consumed and eaten. These again, I think the theme of today is it's about connections.
In layers on layers on layers, because right above the manger where you eat is the Last Supper, where we celebrate our Eucharistic feast. And as you look and offer your devotion or ask for special intercession from the Salus Populi Romani, which is on a piece of wood painted from the Last Supper. So layer on layer on layer as we deepen our claims of the faith. Again, we're not trying to report any facts about who we are as Christians. We're trying to enter into the mystery.
Jill Alexei, you've left us a lot to think about today. Thank you for helping us to enter into some of those layers. If you like what you've just seen, please know that it doesn't end here. We will be back with, let's do the spoiler. Where are we going next time?
Next, we're going to go to the mother of all churches, from the First Marian Church to the mother of all churches, St. John Lateran.
St. John Lateran. You don't want to miss that. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. Thank you so much, Jill Alexi.
Thank you, Sean Patrick.
Arrivederci.